In today's episode, we explore the deadliest animal attacks ever caught on record in the United States, from a coyote attack on a 4-year-old boy to a father who waded through shark-infested waters. March 22, 2018. The remote backwaters of the Florida Everglades became the scene of a horrific tragedy that would expose the deadly consequences of social media stunts gone wrong. The vast wetland ecosystem, spanning over 1,500,000 acres, harbors one of nature's most formidable predators, the American alligator. Troy Lockett, a 26-year-old aspiring content creator from Homestead, Florida, had been struggling with his YouTube channel, Bayou Blunders. With only 3,600 subscribers, Troy specialized in chaotic Southern-style wildlife dares and redneck humor filmed throughout Florida's marshes and backroads. His videos featured increasingly dangerous stunts, like catching venomous snakes barehanded and wrestling wild boars, all in pursuit of the viral moment that would launch his television career. That humid Thursday afternoon, Troy drove to a secluded roadside swamp pull-off along the Taimai Trail, armed with a cooler full of raw chicken and dreams of internet fame. He had scouted this location previously, noting several large alligators that frequented the murky waters near the road. His plan was simple but reckless. Film himself feeding 3 wild gators raw chicken from a stick. American alligators are apex predators that have remained virtually unchanged for 200 million years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of generating crushing forces exceeding 2,100 pounds per square inch. These ancient reptiles are opportunistic feeders and ambush hunters. When habituated to human feeding, they lose their natural fear and become increasingly aggressive in pursuing food sources. Troy set up his smartphone camera, propping it on a red lunchbox positioned on the muddy bank to capture the perfect angle. He grabbed his cooler and a long wooden stick, wading into knee-deep water while addressing his future audience with characteristic bravado. Troy shouted, his voice echoing across the still swamp as he impaled a raw chicken thigh on his makeshift feeding pole, announcing that it was time to see who was hungry today. The first alligator appeared within minutes, a 7-foot female that glided silently toward the scent of fresh meat. Troy held the stick extended, allowing the reptile to snatch the chicken with a powerful snap. Emboldened by success, he prepared another piece as a second gator, slightly larger than 8 feet, emerged from the opposite direction. As Troy stepped deeper into the murky water for better camera angles, he failed to notice the massive shape lurking motionless among the thick reeds behind him. A 12-foot male alligator weighing nearly 800 pounds had been watching the commotion with predatory interest. This ancient bull had been illegally fed by previous visitors for years, conditioning him to associate humans with easy meals and making him dangerously aggressive. Troy tossed another chicken thigh toward the second gator when his foot slipped on the slimy bottom sediment. He stumbled backward, arms flailing as he tried to regain balance, splashing loudly in the shallow water. The sudden movement and noise triggered the massive bull's attack instincts. The enormous alligator exploded from the reeds with terrifying speed, covering 15 feet in less than 2 seconds. Its massive jaws clamped down on Troy's left leg just above the knee with bone-crushing force, instantly shattering his femur and severing major blood vessels. Troy's agonized screams pierced the air as the predator began its signature death roll. The powerful reptile spun Troy's body violently through the water for nearly 20 seconds, each rotation causing additional fractures. The alligator's conical teeth ripped through muscle, tendons, and arteries. Troy's left leg was nearly severed at mid-thigh, held together only by strips of mangled tissue. Blood poured into the dark water as Troy thrashed desperately, his screams becoming weaker with each passing moment. The massive gator maintained its grip while repositioning for a better hold, its teeth now clamped around Troy's torso just below the rib cage. The crushing pressure fractured multiple ribs and punctured his lungs, making breathing impossible. As Troy's struggles weakened from massive blood loss, the alligator dragged him toward deeper water. The other two gators, attracted by the blood and commotion, began circling the area. The final moments came when the massive bull repositioned its jaws around Troy's upper torso and neck. The immense pressure crushed his cervical vertebrae and caused severe brain trauma. Troy's body went limp as the alligator continued its death roll, tearing away large sections of flesh. The smartphone continued recording for 14 agonizing minutes, capturing Troy's screams gradually fading to silence, followed by sounds of splashing water and occasional grunts from the feeding alligators. Troy's disappearance wasn't reported until Monday when he failed to show up for work. His truck was discovered at the remote pull-off by Florida Highway Patrol, along with his smartphone still propped on the lunchbox. Recovery divers found Troy's dismembered remains scattered across the swamp bottom 3 days later. August 3, 2019. The northwestern edge of Houston, Texas was experiencing one of the most severe summer droughts in recent memory. The once flowing creeks that sustained local wildlife had dried to dusty channels, forcing animals to venture deeper into suburban areas in search of water and food. The Melrose family's neighborhood sat precariously on this urban wilderness boundary, with undeveloped woodlots and green belts providing perfect corridors for wildlife to infiltrate residential areas. The Melrose family had moved to this quiet suburban development just 6 months earlier, attracted by the spacious yards and proximity to nature. Their backyard backed up against one of these wooded areas, which they initially saw as a feature rather than a threat. 4-year-old Jordan was a curious, energetic boy who loved exploring the outdoors. His parents had installed a swing set and sandbox where he spent hours playing, always under the watchful eye of his mother or father. In the weeks leading up to that fateful Saturday, residents had reported increased coyote sightings in the neighborhood. Local wildlife officials had issued warnings about keeping small pets indoors and securing trash cans, but no aggressive encounters had been reported. The drought had made these normally shy animals bolder in their search for food and water, but they typically avoided human contact. That evening, as the Texas heat began to subside with the setting sun, the Melrose family was enjoying a typical weekend at home. Jordan's mother was preparing dinner, occasionally checking on her son through the kitchen window as he played with his toys in the backyard. Jordan's father had gone to pick up some groceries, leaving mother and son at home. The family's small dog Pepper was inside the house, barking occasionally at something unseen beyond the fence. What the family didn't realize was that a young male coyote had been frequenting their neighborhood for weeks. Unlike most of its kind, this particular animal had become habituated to human presence through inadvertent feeding. Neighbors had left pet food outside, and unsecured garbage had provided easy meals. Wildlife biologists would later suspect the animal might have been suffering from an early stage of rabies, explaining its uncharacteristically bold behavior. At approximately 6:45 in the evening, Jordan's mother stepped away from the window briefly to answer a phone call. She could still hear her son talking to himself as he played, a reassuring sound that suddenly transformed into a terrified scream. Dropping the phone, she rushed to the back door. The coyote had slipped through a small gap in the fence where it met the ground near the wooded area. Initially, it had approached cautiously, perhaps drawn by the child's small stature and rapid movements, which triggered its predatory instinct. When Jordan spotted the animal and tried to run toward the house, the coyote lunged forward, knocking the boy to the ground. By the time Jordan's mother reached the yard, the coyote had bitten her son multiple times on his arms and neck. The animal, startled by the mother's screams and approach, backed away momentarily but didn't flee. Instead, it circled aggressively, showing none of the fear of humans typical of healthy coyotes. The mother grabbed a nearby garden tool and swung it wildly at the animal, finally driving it back toward the fence gap. As the coyote retreated, the mother scooped up her severely injured son and ran inside, locking the door behind them. Blood soaked through Jordan's t-shirt from multiple puncture wounds. She immediately called 911, desperately trying to stop the bleeding while waiting for emergency services to arrive. Paramedics reached the home within minutes, but Jordan had already lost a dangerous amount of blood from a bite that severed his carotid artery. Despite their best efforts to stabilize him during the rush journey to the hospital, the 4-year-old was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the emergency room. The community was stunned by the tragedy. Wildlife officials set traps in the area and within 2 days captured a visibly unhealthy male coyote matching the mother's description. Testing confirmed the animal was in the early stages of rabies, explaining its abnormally aggressive behavior. The incident was classified as an extraordinarily rare predatory attack, one of only a handful of fatal coyote incidents ever recorded in North America. In the aftermath, the neighborhood underwent significant changes. The Homeowners Association implemented new fencing requirements, ensuring no gaps existed that could allow wildlife to enter yards. The city launched an aggressive wildlife management program and educational campaign about safely coexisting with urban wildlife. Residents were instructed never to feed wildlife even inadvertently, and to report any animals showing unusual behavior immediately. For the Malrose family, no measure could undo their loss. They eventually relocated, unable to remain in a home haunted by such tragedy. A small memorial garden was planted in the neighborhood park, where a plaque bearing Jordan's name reminds residents of the rare but real dangers that can emerge when human development encroaches on wildlife habitat, and of a little boy whose life was cut tragically short by an extraordinary confluence of unfortunate circumstances. The incident stands as a sobering reminder that while fatal wildlife attacks in urban settings are extremely rare, the combination of drought, habitat loss, and habituation to humans can occasionally lead to devastating consequences, forever changing the lives of those involved. Jordan's story reminds us that even suburban fences can't always keep nature at bay. June 9, 2015 was a sweltering day in Miami, Florida, with temperatures climbing into the high 90s and humidity that made the air feel thick and oppressive. As night fell, the temperature remained uncomfortably warm, prompting many residents to crank up their air conditioning units to find relief from the tropical climate. Eliza Carradine was a 29-year-old graphic designer who had moved to Miami 2 years earlier, drawn by the city's creative energy and year-round sunshine. Eliza loved bright colors, covering her apartment with indoor plants, and reading books at night. With her bright smile and easygoing personality, she had quickly made friends in her apartment building and around the neighborhood. Living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Little Havana, Eliza had created a cozy space filled with plants, artwork, and books. She had recently been promoted to senior designer and was excited about the new responsibilities and creative challenges that came with the position. That particular day had been especially exhausting for Eliza. After grabbing food, she returned to her apartment looking forward to a quiet evening of relaxation. After dinner, Eliza took a long shower, changed into her comfortable pajamas, and settled into bed. The summer heat had prompted her to turn up the air conditioning. She began to drift off to sleep. What Eliza didn't know was that her upstairs neighbor had been illegally keeping exotic pets in his apartment for years. Among his collection was a 16-foot Burmese python that he raised in secret, against both building regulations and Florida state law. That night, the massive snake had managed to escape its inadequately secured enclosure. It had slithered out of the neighbor's apartment through his partially open balcony door. The python then descended to the level below by using the building's exterior, its powerful muscles allowing it to navigate the short distance between floors. Burmese pythons are excellent climbers, using their muscular bodies and rough scales to grip surfaces and move vertically with surprising agility. Due to the excess of heat, even with the AC on, Eliza left her balcony door open for fresh air to circulate in, providing the perfect entry point for the predator. Burmese pythons are among the largest snake species in the world, capable of growing over 20 feet long and weighing more than 200 pounds. Native to Southeast Asia, these powerful constrictors are ambush predators, using their excellent sense of smell to locate prey and their incredible strength to squeeze the life from their victims. As Eliza slept peacefully in her bed, the python silently entered through the balcony door and began to explore this new environment. Pythons have heat-sensing pits along their jaws that allow them to detect the body heat of potential prey even in complete darkness. Though not a typical predator to humans, pythons are opportunistic, especially when hunger and heat combine. Drawn by the warmth of Eliza's body, the python slowly approached the bed. Eliza stirred in her sleep. This slight movement was enough to trigger the python's predatory instinct. In one fluid motion, the massive reptile struck, wrapping its muscular coils around Eliza's torso and beginning to constrict. Contrary to popular belief, pythons don't crush their prey or break bones. Instead, they prevent breathing by tightening their coils each time the victim exhales, making it impossible to draw the next breath. Eliza's eyes opened in terror as she felt the crushing pressure around her chest. She tried to scream, but the python's grip had already begun to restrict her ability to draw breath. With her arms pinned to her sides, she thrashed desperately. The python responded to her struggles by tightening its grip further. Each time Eliza exhaled, the snake constricted more, preventing her from taking in a full breath. With each passing second, Eliza's movements became weaker as oxygen deprivation began to affect her brain. In her final moments of consciousness, Eliza managed to kick her legs forcefully enough to knock several books from the shelf, creating a loud thump. Her neighbor in the adjacent apartment, who had been having trouble sleeping, heard the commotion and the loud thump. Concerned, the neighbor knocked on Eliza's door. Receiving no response, she alerted the building's landlord, who had a master key. By the time they entered the apartment, it was already too late. They found Eliza's lifeless body on the floor beside her bed, still partially wrapped in the python's coils. The landlord immediately called 911 and police and animal control officers arrived within minutes. The python was captured and later euthanized for testing. The neighbor was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including manslaughter, illegal possession of exotic animals, and violation of Florida's wildlife laws. He eventually received a 7-year prison sentence. It was March 15, 2013, when the tranquil silence of Cape Coral's canal system was shattered by a scream that would haunt neighbors for years to come. Across the water, a resident heard a sharp, panicked cry cut through the air from Joyce Weller's dock, a sound that ended as abruptly as it began, leaving only ripples on the water and a growing sense that something had gone very wrong. Joyce was a 66-year-old retired schoolteacher who had moved to Cape Coral 3 years earlier, seeking the peaceful retirement that had eluded her during 4 decades in Florida's overcrowded classrooms. Her modest canal-side home offered everything she had dreamed of: spectacular sunrises, elegant egrets perched on her seawall, and the slow, meditative pace she had earned after years of managing unruly students. A lifelong bachelor who preferred solitude to social obligations, Joyce had found her sanctuary in the waterfront living. Joyce's fatal mistake began innocently enough. The previous summer, she had noticed a small alligator, perhaps 4 feet long, occasionally cruising through her canal. She began tossing kitchen scraps into the water from what she considered a safe distance. She named the young gator Benny, and delighted in telling neighbors how he seemed to recognize her morning routine, appearing at her dock like clockwork for his daily meal. However, Joyce failed to understand the predator living just beyond her seawall. American alligators can grow over 14 feet long, crush bone with nearly 3,000 pounds of bite force, and adapt their behavior through repeated human contact. When fed, they lose their fear and begin to associate people with food, turning from wary animals into bold, dangerous threats. Over the months that followed, Benny grew, both in size and boldness. What Joyce interpreted as friendly recognition was actually dangerous conditioning. Each feeding session taught the alligator that humans meant food, gradually eroding the natural wariness that keeps wild alligators at a safe distance from people. By spring 2013, Benny had transformed from a cautious 4-foot juvenile into an 8-foot predator that had learned to associate Joyce's presence with feeding time. The morning of March 15th began like countless others. Joyce emerged from her house carrying a plastic bowl filled with leftover chicken and vegetables. Her usual offering for the gator she had come to consider a pet. She settled at the edge of her dock, legs dangling over the water as she'd done dozens of times before, completely unaware that she was about to become prey rather than provider. What Joyce couldn't see was that months of conditioning had fundamentally altered Benny's behavior. The alligator no longer approached her dock with the cautious curiosity of a wild animal. Instead, he had learned to position himself directly beneath the feeding spot, waiting with the patient focus of an apex predator. His 8-foot frame, now weighing close to 400 pounds, possessed the explosive power to launch his entire body out of the water in a feeding strike. The attack came from directly below with devastating precision. Witnesses from across the canal described a violent eruption of water as Benny launched himself upward, his massive jaws clamping onto Joyce's dangling foot with bone-crushing force. The impact was so powerful that it lifted her partially off the dock before dragging her into the canal in one fluid motion. She had no time to scream again, no opportunity to fight back against a predator that outweighed her by hundreds of pounds. Desperate scratch marks gouged into the weathered wood of the dock told the story of Joyce's final moments, her fingernails clawing frantically for purchase as the alligator's death roll began. The rotational force generated by an adult alligator's death roll can exceed 1,000 pounds, easily breaking bones and causing fatal internal injuries. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, immediately called by her neighbor that saw the attack, they found only Joyce's empty sandal floating near the dock, an overturned plastic bowl that had contained her final offering to Benny, and the telltale drag marks that revealed the tragedy's violent conclusion. Search teams located Joyce's body hours later, pinned against a concrete weir nearly half a mile downstream. The autopsy revealed drowning as the primary cause of death, though the traumatic injuries to her leg indicated she had likely lost consciousness from blood loss and shock before succumbing to the water. Wildlife officials captured Benny that evening using baited treble hooks and chicken, the same food Joyce had used to condition him for months. Following standard protocol for alligators involved in human fatalities, Benny was euthanized. The incident triggered a brief but intense local campaign for stricter canal patrols and enhanced warning signage about alligator feeding. Florida law had long prohibited feeding alligators, with penalties including fines up to $500 and potential jail time. But enforcement remained inconsistent in residential areas. Joyce Weller was buried 4 days later at Coral Ridge Cemetery in a closed casket service. Fewer than 30 people attended, mostly neighbors and relatives, with no formal eulogy given. October 12, 2015, Lake Tahoe, California. The serene mountain landscape was ablaze with autumn colors as temperatures dropped across the Sierra Nevada mountains. Nestled among towering pines stood a secluded two-story cabin, its wooded exterior blending with the surrounding forest. The property, popular on Airbnb for its isolation, promised a peaceful retreat from urban life. Tasha Greystone, a 27-year-old graphic designer from San Francisco, had booked the cabin for a solo getaway. Colleagues described her as hard-working and creative, often pulling late nights to meet deadlines. This trip was her chance to decompress. She arrived Monday afternoon, unpacked groceries, and settled in. That evening, she prepared dinner, opened wine, and left windows cracked for mountain air, a decision that would prove fatal. Earlier that day, Tasha had hiked along the nearby Eagle Falls Trail, posting photos of the spectacular views to her social media accounts. Finally disconnecting, she wrote, unaware of the wildlife warnings posted at the trailhead. Local rangers had documented increased bear activity in the area, with 3 cabin break-ins reported in the previous week alone. The drought had pushed bears to seek alternative food sources, bringing them dangerously close to vacation properties throughout the basin. The cabin's owner, Martin Reeves, had installed bear-proof trash containers outside but failed to include proper wildlife safety instructions in the rental information. A simple reminder to close and lock all windows might have prevented what was about to unfold. Tasha's friends would later recall her love of fresh air and how she always slept with windows open, even in her San Francisco apartment. Black bears in Tahoe had been particularly active that fall. A summer drought reduced their natural food sources before hibernation. Wildlife officials had issued warnings about proper food storage, but many visitors remained unaware. Adult black bears can weigh up to 500 pounds with remarkable strength when motivated by hunger. At 2:30 in the morning, a male black bear detected food scents through the partially open kitchen window. The animal, weighing around 350 pounds, had been foraging nearby properties for weeks. It pushed the window wider and climbed inside, drawn by granola, fruit, and groceries left on the counter. The bear had developed a pattern of behavior that wildlife biologists call food conditioning, associating human structures with easy meals. This particular animal had already broken into 2 vehicles and a garage in the previous month, according to wildlife officials who later examined its DNA and tracking records. Tasha, asleep upstairs, woke to movement below. Assuming another guest, she descended to investigate. At the bottom step, she came face to face with the massive bear. The animal, startled by her sudden appearance, immediately became defensive. Tasha backed away, but the bear advanced. When she turned to flee, it lunged, striking her with its paw and sending her crashing into the dining table. The impact fractured ribs and dislocated her shoulder. As she attempted to escape, the bear bit her leg, causing severe damage and heavy bleeding. Blood pooled on the hardwood floor as the bear continued its attack. Its claws tore through her torso, causing massive internal injuries. The attack lasted several minutes as the bear mauled her repeatedly. By the time it returned to the food, Tasha had succumbed to her injuries, lying motionless beside the overturned furniture. The bear ransacked the kitchen, tearing open cabinets and refrigerator doors. It consumed nearly all available food before moving to the living room, where it destroyed furniture and personal belongings. Evidence suggested the animal remained in the cabin for several hours before finally departing through the same window it had entered. A neighbor walking his dog the next morning noticed the open window and damaged exterior, but assumed it was routine maintenance. This critical delay meant that emergency responders weren't called until hours later, though forensic analysis would later confirm that immediate medical intervention wouldn't have saved Tasha given the severity of her injuries. The property owner discovered Tasha's body the following afternoon during a maintenance check. The bear had consumed most of the food before exiting, leaving devastation behind. Wildlife officials tracked the animal using DNA evidence and euthanized it 3 days later. The incident sparked changes to Airbnb policies in wildlife-prone areas, requiring hosts to provide safety information and proper food storage. Tasha's family established a foundation to educate visitors about wildlife safety in mountain communities. Lake Tahoe authorities reported that while bear encounters were common, fatal attacks remained extremely rare, with Tasha's death being the first recorded in the region in over 2 decades. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife subsequently launched an aggressive public awareness campaign targeting vacation rental guests throughout the Sierra Nevada region. March 15, 2019, Riverside County, California. The sprawling 40-acre property in the desert hills of Riverside County had once been home to exotic animals used in Hollywood productions. Now retired, the facility served as a sanctuary for aging performers, including several chimpanzees that had spent decades in the entertainment industry. The compound featured reinforced enclosures, medical facilities, and specialized housing designed for animals transitioning from show business to retirement. Melinda Hart, a 34-year-old documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles, had spent months negotiating access to create her passion project about retired circus animals. Her previous work focused on animal welfare, earning her recognition in independent film circles. The sanctuary's owner, believing Hart's documentary could raise awareness about proper animal retirement care, granted unprecedented access to film interviews and interactions with the facility's most famous residents. That morning, Hart arrived with minimal crew, just herself and a cameraman, to conduct what she called an interview with Caesar, a 28-year-old male chimpanzee who had appeared in numerous commercials and films throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. The plan involved Hart sitting outside Caesar's enclosure while asking questions, creating an artistic piece about communication between species. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest living relatives, sharing approximately 98.8% of human DNA. Adult males can weigh between 88 and 130 pounds, with arm spans reaching up to 7 feet. Their strength is legendary, estimated to be 4 to 6 times stronger than humans of comparable size. In the wild, chimpanzees live in complex social hierarchies where displays of dominance often involve aggressive behaviors, including biting, hitting, and territorial attacks. Caesar had been removed from his mother at 6 months old for entertainment training. Decades of human interaction had created an animal caught between two worlds, neither fully wild nor completely domesticated. Recent behavioral assessments noted increased agitation and territorial displays, particularly around unfamiliar humans. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, Hart positioned herself 3 feet from Caesar's enclosure gate while her cameraman filmed from a safe distance. The sanctuary owner had stepped away to handle feeding schedules for other animals. Hart began her scripted questions, treating Caesar as an interview subject. Caesar initially appeared calm, sitting near the enclosure's front. Without warning, the 120-pound chimpanzee lunged forward, his powerful arms reaching through the chain-link barrier. His hand seized Hart's left arm and shoulder, pulling her against the fence with tremendous force. The impact created a metallic rattling that echoed across the compound. Hart's screams pierced the desert air as Caesar's grip tightened. His fingers, each possessing the strength of a human arm, crushed muscle and bone. The chimpanzee's canine teeth, measuring over an inch long, punctured Hart's shoulder and upper arm repeatedly. Blood began flowing through the chain link openings. Caesar then grabbed Hart's head with both hands, his fingers wrapping around her skull. The crushing pressure fractured her temporal bone while his thumbs pressed into her eye sockets. Hart's body convulsed as Caesar shook her violently against the fence, her neck snapping back and forth with each movement. The cameraman's frantic calls for help brought the sanctuary owner running, but Caesar's attack continued for nearly 4 minutes. The chimpanzee's powerful jaws clamped down on Hart's face, his teeth penetrating her cheek and jaw. Bone fragments mixed with tissue as Caesar's bite force, measuring 1,300 pounds per square inch, destroyed her facial structure. Hart's body went limp as massive blood loss and traumatic brain injury from the skull crushing proved fatal. Caesar finally released his grip, retreating to the back of his enclosure while Hart's lifeless form remained pressed against the fence. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes but could only pronounce Hart deceased at the scene. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department launched an investigation into safety protocols at the facility. Caesar was immediately quarantined pending evaluation by animal behavior specialists. Hart's family released a brief statement expressing their devastation while requesting privacy during their grief. The documentary project was permanently shelved, and the sanctuary implemented new safety measures, including increased barrier distances and mandatory supervision during all human-animal interactions. November 17, 2008. The bustling streets of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, fell quiet as night descended upon the city. The capital's outskirts, where industrial zones meet residential areas, are typically deserted after dark except for the occasional security guard making their rounds. The area was dotted with poorly regulated facilities, including an illegal exotic animal compound that would soon become the epicenter of tragedy. Rahim Gebrselassie, a 37-year-old security guard, had been working at a warehouse complex for nearly 3 years. A father of two with a reputation for reliability, Rahim had taken the night shift to earn extra money for his family. The job was usually uneventful, checking locks, monitoring for trespassers, and making hourly rounds through the dimly lit alleys between buildings. That night, however, something was different. Several stray dogs in the area were unusually agitated, barking incessantly at the shadows. Unknown to Rahim, a male lion had escaped from a nearby illegal exotic animal facility earlier that evening. The owner had been collecting dangerous animals for years, housing them in substandard conditions with inadequate security measures. A combination of poor enclosure design and negligent supervision had allowed the predator to slip away unnoticed. African lions are apex predators, weighing between 330 and 420 pounds, with powerful muscles designed for taking down large prey. In their natural habitat, they hunt primarily at dawn, dusk, and night, relying on stealth rather than speed for most of their approach. The escaped lion, likely stressed and disoriented in the unfamiliar urban environment, had been moving through the shadows, following the paths of least resistance, drainage ditches, alleyways, and vacant lots. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, Rahim was making his routine patrol near the back of the warehouse complex. He carried only a flashlight and a radio as he walked between two large storage buildings. The narrow passage was poorly lit, with several dumpsters creating areas of complete darkness. As Rahim approached one such area, his flashlight beam briefly caught a reflection of eyes in the darkness. The attack happened without warning. The lion charged from approximately 15 feet away, a distance it covered in less than a second. The initial impact knocked Rahim to the ground, his flashlight skittering across the pavement. The lion, following instinctual hunting behavior, immediately targeted Rahim's neck and face, a technique evolved to quickly immobilize prey by cutting off air supply rather than causing immediate blood loss. Rahim's cries for help echoed briefly through the complex. A night watchman in a building across the street later reported hearing shouts followed by what he described as terrible sounds, but was too frightened to investigate or even look out his window. The entire attack likely lasted less than a minute. The lion's powerful jaws closed around Rahim's neck, cutting off his airway. Death would have come relatively quickly from asphyxiation, with unconsciousness occurring within 10 to 20 seconds. After Rahim was no longer moving, the lion dragged his body a short distance behind one of the dumpsters, a natural behavior to move prey away from the open and into a more secluded location. Evidence at the scene suggested the lion remained with the body for several hours before moving on. Though feeding was minimal, another indication of the predator's disoriented state in the unfamiliar environment. Rahim's body was discovered at 5:45 in the morning by another security guard arriving for the morning shift. Authorities were immediately called and police secured the area. Local wildlife officials and police officers conducted a careful search of the surrounding neighborhood, eventually locating the lion in an abandoned construction site approximately 400 meters from the attack location. Given the urban setting and immediate danger to the public, officials made the decision to euthanize the animal rather than attempt capture. A police marksman dispatched the lion with a single shot. The subsequent investigation confirmed it had escaped from an illegal exotic animal facility owned by a local businessman with connections to wildlife trafficking. The facility owner was arrested and faced multiple charges, including criminal negligence resulting in death and illegal possession of protected wildlife. He was eventually sentenced to 8 years in prison, though many in the community felt the punishment was insufficient given the preventable nature of the tragedy. Rahim's family struggled in the aftermath. While they received some compensation through the court, the loss of the family's primary provider created lasting hardship. His widow eventually relocated with their children to live with relatives in another part of the city. The incident prompted a brief period of increased enforcement of wildlife regulations in Addis Ababa, though critics noted that systemic issues and oversight remained largely unaddressed. The tragic death of Rahim Gabrielasi serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can emerge when wild predators enter human spaces through negligence and illegal activity. Yet his story would not be the last of its kind. Just months later in northern India, forest ranger Vikram Singh would encounter a similar fate while investigating reports of a tiger near the edge of a national park. The predator's unusual behavior would raise questions about the increasing conflicts between humans and wildlife in rapidly developing regions. It was July 2nd, 2016, when Daniel Kirkham stepped off his kayak and into the calm-looking waters of Mosquito Lagoon. The sun was high and the falling tide exposed oyster beds, prime hunting conditions for coastal predators. What started as a routine family outing took a sharp turn, as Daniel's two sons watched helplessly while the water around their father suddenly erupted. Daniel Kirkham was a 43-year-old father from Gainesville, known among friends and family for his quiet confidence and deep love of Florida's wild waterways. Most weekends found him exploring remote estuaries and unmarked creeks with his two young sons, ages 8 and 11, teaching them to appreciate the natural world he had grown to love over decades of outdoor adventures. Daniel preferred the solitude of forgotten channels to crowded boat ramps, seeking out the brackish backwaters where only the splash of paddles disturbed the peaceful marsh. However, Daniel may not have fully understood that bull sharks, among the world's most dangerous predators, were uniquely adapted to hunt in the exact shallow conditions he had chosen for his family outing. Unlike their oceanic cousins, bull sharks possess the remarkable ability to regulate salt in their bodies, allowing them to venture far into freshwater systems and shallow estuaries where other sharks cannot survive. They can grow up to 11 feet long and weigh over 500 pounds, with a bite force exceeding 1,300 pounds per square inch, enough to sever a human limb in a single strike. That morning, Daniel had launched from a public ramp where a printed warning about increased shark activity had been posted on the bulletin board. The notice, issued by Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, specifically cautioned against entering the water in areas where bait fish activity was high. Daniel glanced at the warning but dismissed it as routine. believing it was just another generic advisory issued more for legal coverage than actual danger, especially in a place he had fished for years without incident. As the tide continued to drop, Daniel found himself forced to exit his kayak to prevent it from grounding on the muddy bottom. The water was thigh-deep and murky, stirred up by his movement and the kayak's passage through the narrow channel. Behind them, schools of small baitfish darted nervously through the shallows, a clear indication that larger predators were active in the area. The nervous behavior of prey fish is one of nature's most reliable warning systems, but Daniel was focused on navigating the challenging passage rather than reading the subtle signs around him. The disturbance created by Daniel's movement through the shallow channel would have been detectable from hundreds of yards away, drawing any nearby predators like a beacon. The murky water that made navigation difficult for Daniel provided perfect camouflage for a shark approaching from below. According to his kids, the attack came out of nowhere as Daniel guided his kayak around a narrow bend in the channel. His younger son would later describe the moment to investigators as looking like the water exploded. A bull shark, estimated at 5 to 6 feet in length and weighing approximately 200 pounds, surged from a deeper cut in the channel and clamped its powerful jaws around Daniel's lower torso. The shark's attack followed the classic pattern of bull shark predation: a single powerful bite followed by immediate release and retreat. Unlike great whites, which often hold on to their prey, bull sharks typically strike and withdraw, allowing their victim to bleed out while they assess the situation from a safe distance. Daniel collapsed backward into the water, his anguish cry echoing across the marsh as blood began to spread rapidly through the murky water. His sons, still secure in their kayak, began screaming in terror as they watched their father struggle against injuries that were already proving fatal. Despite the shock and pain, Daniel's paternal instincts remained intact. He urged his boys to stay in the kayak and use the emergency whistle attached to the deck to call for help. The older boy, trying to stay calm, paddled toward the main inlet in search of help. His younger brother pressed a shirt to the wound, his hands quickly soaked in blood. A nearby fishing guide responded within minutes, but Daniel had already lost consciousness. Despite attempts at first aid and emergency medical service arriving within minutes, he was pronounced dead before he could be airlifted to a trauma center. Daniel was laid to rest 5 days later in a modest cemetery outside Gainesville. The service was private, attended by close family, a handful of fellow outdoorsmen, and several local officials who had assisted in the recovery effort. In the aftermath, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission increased patrols around Mosquito Lagoon and began posting larger, more prominent warnings at public access points. The agency emphasized the importance of heeding advisories, especially during peak baitfish activity in shallow waters. August 18, 2011 dawned crisp and clear in Boulder, Colorado with the promise of another beautiful summer day. The morning air carried a slight chill that would soon give way to warmth. Ideal conditions for hiking, climbing, or in Avery Flint's case, running. Avery was a 17-year-old high school student with her whole life ahead of her. She was known throughout Boulder High School as one of their most promising long-distance runners. Running wasn't just a sport for Avery, it was her passion, her meditation, and her way of connecting with the natural world around her. Every morning, rain or shine, Avery would lace up her running shoes and hit the trails before most people had even poured their first cup of coffee. She had a passion for running, joining competitions and events. Her parents, both working professionals, had initially been concerned about her running alone, but had grown comfortable with her routine over time. That morning began like any other summer day for Avery. She woke up at 6:30 a.m. After a quick breakfast of toast and a banana, she headed out the door, telling her mother she'd be back in an hour. The Chautauqua Park Trail was her chosen route that day, a path she'd run countless times before. The trail was quiet that morning, with only a few early hikers nodding hello as they passed. As Avery entered a more wooded section of the trail, she fully immersed in her running, listening to music, completely unaware of the dangers lurking. Due to her running alone in the forest, she unknowingly attracted a mountain lion with her loud running, cautiously following her, hiding in a small cliff near her. These solitary predators are masters of stealth, with specially adapted retractable claws that allow them to move silently through their territory. Their tan coats blend perfectly with the rocky terrain of Colorado's foothills, making them nearly invisible when stationary. Mountain lions typically avoid humans, but certain factors, hunger, territorial instincts, or the protection of young, can occasionally lead to attacks. In this case, the mountain lion may have perceived Avery's running motion as prey-like behavior, triggering its hunting instinct. Wildlife biologists note that running activates a mountain lion's chase response, as the movement mimics that of fleeing prey. The attack came without warning. As Avery rounded a bend in the trail, the mountain lion pounced from above, landing squarely on her back with devastating force. Mountain lions can leap up to 40 feet horizontally and 15 feet vertically, making their ambush attacks nearly impossible to defend against. The impact knocked her face first onto the dirt path, the weight of the 130-pound cat driving the air from her lungs. The mountain lion had clamped its powerful jaws around the back of her neck. The initial bite was strong enough to sever the spinal cord, a killing technique perfected over millennia of evolution. Mountain lions have specialized carcanial teeth that act like scissors. Targeting the neck of prey, are remarkably efficient and typically result in a quick death. A medical examiner confirmed that Avery's body went limp almost immediately as the cat's canine teeth penetrated deep into her neck. With its prey now subdued, the mountain lion began to drag Avery's body off the main trail and into the underbrush. This behavior is typical of large cats who prefer to feed in seclusion, away from potential threats or competition. Avery is now food for the mountain lion. 2 hours later, a hiker veered slightly off the main trail to photograph a patch of wildflowers. Instead, he made the gruesome discovery of Avery's partially covered body. The hiker, with shaking hands, called 911, reporting the location and the nature of what he had found. The mountain lion dragged her approximately 100 feet from the trail into a dense thicket where it began to cover her body with leaves and debris, a behavior known as caching. This instinctive action helps hide the kill from scavengers and other predators, allowing the mountain lion to return over the next several days to feed, rather than consuming the entire prey at once. The response was swift. Boulder County Sheriff's deputies, park rangers, and emergency medical personnel converged on the scene. The medical examiner later confirmed what was already apparent. Avery had died from catastrophic injuries to her neck and spine. The attack pattern was unmistakably that of a mountain lion. Wildlife experts later determined that she likely lost consciousness within seconds of the initial strike, sparing her from experiencing the full horror of what followed. Colorado Parks and Wildlife officials immediately launched a search for the responsible animal. Using tracking dogs and following the trail of disturbed vegetation, they located the mountain lion later that day, approximately half a mile from where Avery's body had been found. The decision was made to euthanize the animal, both to prevent further attacks and to test it for diseases that might have contributed to its unusual behavior. It was July 20th, 2022 when the air hung thick and oppressive over central Florida's Lake Hachanilla. The backyard barbecue at the Henderson's lakeside property had been winding down for hours, but the combination of beer, old grudges, and summer heat had transformed what should have been a peaceful gathering into something far more volatile. At the center of the brewing storm stood Zach Renner, his face flushed red from alcohol and humiliation. Zach was a 29-year-old construction worker from Kissimmee, known among his circle for his impulsive decisions and inflated sense of his own capabilities. His social media showed a pattern of escalating stunts, leaping off overpasses, wrestling pit bulls, even grabbing a rattlesnake barehanded. Raised by a hard-working single father who prized toughness and rarely intervened, Zach learned early on that attention, even through dumb recklessness, was its own kind of validation. The evening had started pleasantly enough, with grilled burgers and cold beers flowing freely among the dozen or so friends gathered on the Henderson's dock. But as the sun set and inhibitions lowered, old tensions began to surface. The breaking point came when Zach's girlfriend of 2 years, Jessica, announced in front of everyone that she was done with his childish crap and walked away, leaving him standing alone by the water's edge. The humiliation was too much for Zach's fragile ego to bear. His friends watched as his face cycled through embarrassment, anger, and finally a dangerous kind of determination. Earlier in the evening, someone had mentioned spotting what looked like a large alligator near the boat ramp, but the sighting had been dismissed as probably just a log or debris. Zach shouted, slurring slightly as he pointed toward the dark water, that he was going to find the gator and ride it like a cowboy. He said he'd show everyone what a real man looked like. To him, it was a stunt for laughs and bragging rights. To everyone else, it was another reminder that Zach never understood where confidence ended and stupidity began. His friends initially laughed, assuming it was just drunken bravado, but as Zach began stripping off his shirt and stumbling toward the water's edge, their amusement turned to alarm. Several people called out for him to stop, but Zach was beyond reason, driven by a toxic combination of alcohol, wounded pride, and the need to prove something to people who were no longer paying attention. Thinking before acting had never been his strong suit. What Zach didn't know was that local anglers had recently reported an unusually large male alligator, estimated at 11 feet long, prowling this particular stretch of Lake Hachanina. Wildlife officials suspected the animal had been pushed into the narrower bay by territorial disputes with other males during mating season. American alligators are ancient predators, with instincts honed over millions of years. Adult males can grow up to 14 feet long and weigh over 1,000 pounds, delivering a bite strong enough to crush a bowling ball. Their 80 razor-sharp teeth form a grip that, once locked, is almost impossible to escape. As Zach moved deeper, the water rose to his chest, the soft, uneven lake bottom slowing his steps. He slapped the surface and shouted taunts, unaware of the danger. His friends watched in uneasy silence, some filming, hoping it was just another stunt. Little did they know, something beneath the surface had already begun to shift. The alligator had been likely watching from the moment Zach entered the water. Concealed among the reeds just 20 feet away, the massive reptile remained perfectly still, only its eyes and nostrils breaking the surface. To the predator, Zach's splashing and shouting weren't intimidating, they were an announcement of prey in distress. The attack came without warning. One moment Zach was chest deep in the murky water, still yelling taunts at the darkness. The next, the surface exploded as nearly half a ton of prehistoric predator surged forward with devastating speed. The alligator's massive jaws clamped around Zach's midsection with bone-crushing force, the impact audible even over his single terrified scream. What followed was a textbook death roll, the alligator's signature killing technique. The massive reptile spun rapidly in the water, using its entire body weight to disorient its prey and cause massive internal trauma. The water around them erupted in a violent whirlpool of foam and red, as Zach's body was twisted and torn by forces no human could survive. Chaos broke out on the dock. Jessica screamed and collapsed as others shouted Zach's name into the silent water. One guy stepped in to help but froze when the alligator surfaced, Zach's limp body in its jaws before vanishing into deeper water. All they could do was call for help. Emergency services arrived within the hour, but everyone knew it was a recovery operation, not a rescue. The lake was immediately closed to the public while wildlife officials began the grim task of locating both the victim and the predator responsible. The alligator was found and euthanized the following day, its stomach contents confirming what everyone already knew. Zach's remains, what could be recovered, were returned to his family for burial. The incident made local news, with a few outlets treating it as another example of Florida man's stupidity. In the days following the attack, Florida Fish and Wildlife officials closed off access to the lake and posted new warning signs around the perimeter. They also launched a community outreach campaign on the dangers of feeding or approaching wild alligators, emphasizing how quickly such behavior can lead to fatal outcomes. It was August 3, 2015, late afternoon, when Marcus Leventhal made his final jump into the flooded drainage canal in western Florida. The 15-year-old high school sophomore had been seen earlier that day by a neighbor running shirtless along the concrete embankment behind an abandoned housing development. He laughed loudly and jumped into the murky, debris-filled water. It would be the last time anyone saw Marcus alive. Marcus was known throughout his neighborhood for his reckless curiosity and insatiable appetite for danger. His friends and family noted a pattern of increasingly risky behavior, trespassing in storm drains, exploring abandoned buildings, and handling venomous snakes with casual confidence. He had been raised with little supervision. His father worked long shifts as a tow truck operator, and his mother had moved out years earlier. With no clear boundaries and few consequences, Marcus learned to see rules as suggestions and danger as a challenge, not a warning. The summer of 2015 hit South Florida hard. Hurricane Debbie caused widespread flooding that overwhelmed several illegal exotic animal breeders near Weston, allowing dozens of non-native species to escape. Among them were Burmese pythons bred for the pet trade. Wildlife officials have been tracking the predators for months, but the region's canals and drainage systems made containment nearly impossible. Burmese pythons are among the world's largest snakes, with specimens regularly exceeding 20 feet in length and weighing over 200 pounds. These massive constrictors possess incredible strength. Their muscular coils can exert pressure of up to 90 pounds per square inch, enough to stop blood flow and cause cardiac arrest in prey within minutes. The drainage canal where Marcus chose to swim that day had been transformed by recent rains into a perfect hunting ground for displaced predators. The water was high, murky, and filled with organic debris that provided ideal camouflage for ambush hunters. Palm fronds, construction materials, and storm runoff had created a maze of hiding spots where a large python could remain completely concealed while waiting for prey to venture within striking distance. Marcus had arrived at the canal alone that afternoon, ignoring frantic texts from friends who had planned to join him but were prevented by family obligations. His phone, wallet, and discarded shirt were later found wedged under a drainage grate, suggesting he had prepared for an extended swimming session in the contaminated water. Witnesses reported seeing him dive repeatedly, apparently searching for something beneath the surface, behavior that would have created the perfect opportunity for a python lying in wait among the submerged debris. Investigators believe the attack occurred in the knee-deep reeds near the canal's edge, where Marcus may have been diving or wading when the python struck. The snake likely mistook the splashing teenager for natural prey, wild pigs, deer, or large birds that frequently visit water sources in South Florida. The strike would have been sudden and violent. Pythons bite first to anchor their grip, then coil with explosive force, crushing the chest and cutting off blood flow within seconds. As Marcus struggled, every exhale allowed the coils to tighten further, collapsing his lungs and halting circulation. Death usually comes in under a minute, not from the bite, but from the sheer mechanical pressure of being slowly crushed alive. There were no signs of a fight, no defensive wounds, no screams. The ambush likely left him stunned and helpless as the snake finished its work. In the thick brown water surrounded by reeds and garbage, the scene was hidden from view. By the time anyone might have passed by, there was nothing left to hear or see. Just silence, and the slow drag of something heavy slipping below the surface. When Marcus failed to return home, his parents alerted authorities and search teams began combing the canal. But the murky, debris-filled water made recovery efforts nearly impossible. 2 days later, licensed python trapper Jorge Rivas spotted a bloated 13-foot Burmese python downstream, coiled beneath a leaning tree and showing signs of a recent large meal. He euthanized the snake and, during dissection, discovered the partially digested remains of Marcus, still identifiable by a skate park wristband. Forensics confirmed he had been swallowed whole, likely within hours of the attack, with dental records and personal items proving final confirmation. Marcus's death prompted immediate action from local authorities, who issued renewed warnings about post-storm wildlife hazards, particularly in neighborhoods adjacent to canal systems. A temporary fencing program was implemented near known drainage routes, and wildlife officials intensified their efforts to locate and remove escaped exotic species from suburban areas. Marcus was buried 3 days later in a quiet service attended by classmates, teachers, and extended family. His casket was closed, and grief counselors were brought into his school the following week to help students process the sudden, violent loss. It was October 25, 2017, when the autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke across Marlene Brickshaw's property just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The 58-year-old retired librarian stood at her kitchen window watching two massive black bears lumber around the chain-link enclosure she had built with her own hands 3 years earlier. What began as a rescue mission for two orphan cubs had turned into something far more dangerous than Marlene ever expected. Marlene was the kind of woman who collected stray cats, fed wild deer from her back porch, and believed deeply that animals could sense the purity of human intentions. Her neighbors knew her as the eccentric lady who lived in what she called Little Ark, a wooded property cluttered with bird feeders, rescue dog kennels, and now a makeshift bear habitat that had become the talk of the county. Her clothes perpetually bore the stains of whatever animal she was currently nursing back to health. 3 years earlier, wildfires in northern Arizona left two black bear cubs orphaned. Marlene, following the rescue efforts, applied for a wildlife permit and convinced authorities to let her take them in, claiming she had rehab experience in proper facilities. Her so-called proper facilities were a 40 by 60 foot chain-link pen she built behind her house, roofless with no backup barriers or safety protocols. A single gate opened straight into the enclosure, offering no secure way to feed or separate the bears. It wasn't just unsafe, it was flat out stupid. The kind of setup no trained professional would ever go near without sounding the alarm. For 3 years, Marlene hand-fed the bears daily, referring to them affectionately as her boys, Bruno and Baxter. She would enter their enclosure with buckets of food, talking to them in the same gentle voice she had once used to calm nervous library patrons. Local reporters occasionally featured her story as a heartwarming example of human-animal bonding, and Marlene basked in the attention, unaware of her recklessness. What Marlene interpreted as trust was actually learned behavior. The bears associated her presence with food, nothing more. As the cubs grew into 300-pound adults, neighbors began expressing concern about the increasingly inadequate enclosure and Marlene's casual approach to safety. The bears had been spotted standing on their hind legs against the fence, their massive paws easily reaching over the top of the chain-link barrier. Black bears can range in color from cinnamon to black, with adult males reaching up to 600 pounds. Their 4-inch claws and 800 psi bite force make them capable of crushing bone and tearing flesh. Though omnivorous and often unpredictable, even hand-raised bears retain wild instincts and can turn violent without warning. Having one in your property leaves no room for stupidity. By fall 2017, one of the bears, Bruno, the larger of the two, had begun showing signs of food aggression, particularly when meals were delayed or when Marlene approached with smaller portions than expected. Bears in captivity often develop resource guarding behaviors, especially when their feeding schedule becomes irregular. That October afternoon, Marlene was running nearly 2 hours late for feeding, delayed by a call from her sister. She loaded a tray with leftover lasagna, rolls, and fruit, then headed toward the pen. Security footage showed her carrying the food in both hands as she approached the enclosure. She wore no protective gear, no gloves, no face shield, nothing to shield her. The enclosure lacked a drop cage or buffer gate for safe feeding. It was just Marlene, a tray of food, and two restless 300-pound bears. As she stepped inside, whistling her usual greeting, Bruno was already pacing near the gate. His body language, tense movements, fixated stare on the food, ears flattened, was a clear warning. These were textbook signs of a bear gearing up to dominate a meal. She barely had time to register any of it before Bruno lunged. He struck her in the chest with a force that lifted her off her feet, sending her crashing onto the hard-packed earth. The tray clattered from her hands, lasagna and fruit scattering across the dirt as her screams filled the cage. What followed was brutal and efficient. Bruno's powerful jaws clamped down on Marlene's face and neck, his teeth designed for crushing bone and tearing flesh. As she struggled weakly beneath his massive weight, he began dragging her toward a shaded corner of the enclosure, a behavior that wildlife experts recognize as a bear's instinct to protect and consume its kill away from potential competitors. Her screams carried across the wooded property to her nearest neighbor, Jim Kowalski, who was working in his garage nearly 200 yards away. He immediately called 911, but the remote location meant that emergency responders faced a lengthy drive on winding mountain roads. By the time sheriff's deputies and wildlife officials arrived 2 hours later, Marlene was beyond help. Bruno stood over her partially consumed remains, blood matting his dark fur, while Baxter cowered in the far corner of the enclosure. The scene was so horrific that several first responders required counseling afterward. Bruno was euthanized on site, while Baxter was tranquilized and eventually transferred to a legitimate wildlife sanctuary in Colorado, where he would live out his days behind proper barriers with trained professionals. The investigation revealed numerous safety violations and highlighted the dangers of amateur wildlife rehabilitation. Arizona Game and Fish Department spokesman Mark Hart summed up the tragedy succinctly that love is not a safety protocol. Wild animals, regardless of how they're raised, retain their predatory instincts and unpredictable nature. It was May 7, 2016, the Florida sun casting long shadows across the Valencia Greens golf course as Glenn Perro made his final walk. The 72-year-old widower from upstate New York had moved to the villages 9 months earlier, seeking the peace and sunshine that had eluded him after his wife's passing. What he found instead was his own tragic end in the murky waters of a retention pond. Glenn was known throughout his neighborhood as a friendly but stubborn man who had little patience for what he called Florida rules. His evening walks had become routine, shortcuts through the golf course rather than the designated cart paths, dismissive waves at maintenance staff who warned him about wildlife, and a general disdain for the yellow caution tape and warning signs that sprout like weeds after every rainstorm. That evening, recent rainfall had caused the retention pond near the 8th hole to overflow, creating the perfect conditions for an alligator to venture beyond its usual territory. The standing water mixed with runoff containing fish waste and organic matter would have attracted the predator's attention. It was a recipe for something to go horribly wrong. Spring in Florida marks the beginning of alligator mating season, when males become increasingly territorial and aggressive, expanding their range in search of mates and new hunting grounds. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their bite force measures an astounding 2,980 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a turtle shell or snap a human femur like a twig. Glenn stepped over the barrier chain and yellow caution tape at 7:15 p.m., picked up by security footage around the area. His shoes splashed through the ankle-deep floodwater as he took the shortcut, completely unaware that he was being watched. A greenskeeper loading tools onto his maintenance car spotted Glenn across the flooded area. He was about to call out a warning when something near the grass line caught his attention. A shape that had been perfectly still, now drifting slightly with the current. The 10-foot male alligator had been lying in wait, using a hunting strategy perfected over millennia. The attack came without warning. The massive reptile launched from the brush with explosive force, its powerful tail propelling it through the water faster than Glenn could react. The alligator's jaws clamped onto Glenn's right leg with devastating precision. The initial bite crushed bone instantly, the sound audible to the greenskeeper from 50 yards away. What followed was the alligator's signature killing technique, the death roll. The spinning maneuver used to disorient prey and tear away chunks of flesh is one of nature's most efficient killing methods. Glenn was yanked off his feet and dragged into the deeper section of the pond. His evening walk transformed into a nightmare in seconds. The greenskeeper shouted and ran toward the water's edge, but the distance and his own safety concerns prevented any rescue attempt, so he phoned for help. He said he saw Glenn surfaced once, his arms thrashing, before the alligator's powerful jaws pulled him under for the final time. The entire struggle lasted less than 15 seconds. Emergency responders arrived within minutes of the 911 call, but the pond had already returned to its calm. Dive teams worked through the night, their underwater lights cutting through the murky water as they searched for Glenn's remains. Recovery divers located Glenn's body the following morning, wedged against the concrete drainage inlet where the current had carried him. The injuries were catastrophic. The alligator's initial bite had shattered his femur and caused massive blood loss, but the official cause of death was drowning. The predator responsible was captured hours later using baited hooks. Following standard protocol for alligators involved in human fatalities, it was euthanized by wildlife officers. The investigation revealed that Glenn had walked past multiple warning signs, stepped over barrier chains, and ignored verbal warnings from maintenance staff. The retention pond had been clearly marked as a wildlife zone, with signs posted in both English and Spanish warning of alligator danger. Some residents called for stricter penalties for ignoring closures, while others argued that extensive restrictions infringed on their freedom. But for those who knew Glenn personally, it was simply a tragic end to a familiar pattern. A stubborn man who believed rules were suggestions, until one proved fatal. It was July 4th, 2016, a quiet summer morning on the wooded outskirts of Anchorage. 67-year-old Howard Tiller stepped barefoot onto his back porch to enjoy the peaceful air, occasionally broken only by birdsong through the towering spruce trees. But at the tree line near his weathered shed, two massive grizzly bears, drawn by the sweet scent of unsecured garbage bags, were circling each other with increasing aggression. Howard was a retired machinist with a stubborn streak and a dangerous sense of familiarity with wildlife. Living alone on 5 unfenced acres, he treated animals like neighbors, feeding strays and chasing off moose with a broom. He scoffed at bear warnings and refused protective gear, convinced that loud voices and calm gestures worked better than spray or firearms. This stupidity, honed for decades, would be his undoing. Over time, neighbors grew used to watching Howard chase off animals with nothing but loud shouts or household objects. His success turned into a local myth, and from a distance, some even watched the sport. Many believed he had a special understanding of wildlife, and eventually, so did he. That fatal morning, as the two grizzlies growled over the trash pile behind his shed, garbage bags he'd left out overnight despite repeated warnings from wildlife officials, Howard responded as he always had. A neighbor spied him grabbing a metal trash can lid and walked down his gravel path like it was any other Tuesday. What Howard fatally underestimated was the sheer destructive power of the predators treating his backyard like their personal territory. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adult males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing the strength to flip over boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their massive paws, equipped with claws of up to 4 inches long, can decapitate a moose with a single swipe. When defending food sources or feeling threatened, grizzlies become killing machines driven by millions of years of evolutionary programming. His approach was unchanging. Create noise, show dominance, and interrupt what he assumed was just a territorial struggle. Another neighbor across his property later described hearing Howard shouting in a firm and familiar voice, barking out orders as if he were trying to shoo away stray dogs. Howard advanced to within 15 feet of the feeding bear, slamming the lid like a cymbal and swinging it over his head in what he believed would come across as threatening. The younger bear reacted with alarm, crashing into the brush in a panicked retreat. But the larger male stayed firmly in place, intent on finishing its meal. This particular bear had been interrupted mid-feeding and showed visible signs of past battles that had likely left it on edge and hyper-defensive. Bears that become conditioned to human food often stop fearing people entirely and instead come to see them as rivals. As Howard continued his approach, undeterred by the bear's warning posture, the animal made a sudden lethal decision. People watching said the grizzly charged without hesitation, closing the distance in less than 3 seconds. Howard managed to lift the trash can lid in a weak attempt to shield himself, but the bear smashed through it effortlessly. The lid clattered onto the gravel, useless, as the full force of the bear's bulk threw Howard backward and pinned him instantly. The autopsy later cited that the bear's jaws crushed Howard's thigh, its canines snapping his femur and tearing deep into muscle. His shouts turned to screams as claws ripped open his chest and stomach. Weighing nearly 10 times more, the grizzly pinned him effortlessly and kept attacking. Residents, drawn out by the commotion, watched in stunned silence as the bear dragged Howard's limp, bloodied body into the brush. One neighbor, witnessing it through binoculars, called 911 as it unfolded. Within seconds, both man and animal disappeared into the trees. All that remained was scattered trash, crushed foliage, and streaks of blood. When authorities arrived 40 minutes later with tranquilizers and tracking gear, the bear was gone. They found Howard's body in a shaded clearing just 40 yards from his porch, torn open with the unmistakable violence of a grizzly kill. A trail of blood through crushed ferns and matted grass marked the brutal path he'd been dragged. Investigators found used bear spray and a whistle just feet away inside his porch, dismissed as unnecessary. The incident spurred renewed efforts to educate Alaskans on food waste and the dangers of wildlife habituation. A small memorial service was held 4 days later at the Anchorage Cremation Center, attended by a few close neighbors and his brother, who flew in from Montana to scatter Howard's ashes near the porch he had once considered safe. October 12, 2022. In the remote wilderness of Banff National Park, Canada, the crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. The Canadian Rockies stood majestically against the darkening sky as Shauna Behringer, a 31-year-old nature photographer from Vancouver, pitched her tent just outside the monitored camping zone. Her partner Alex helped secure their temporary home for the night, unaware that this decision would lead to tragedy. Shauna had built her reputation capturing the raw beauty of North America's wildlife. Her Instagram portfolio showcased breathtaking shots of wolves, moose, and bears in their natural habitats. This particular trip to Banff was meant to add stunning fall foliage and wildlife images to her growing collection. The couple had deliberately chosen a spot away from the crowded, designated camping areas, seeking solitude and authentic wilderness experiences. Park rangers had posted numerous warning signs about proper food storage in bear country, but in their haste to set up camp before nightfall, Shauna and Alex made a fatal error. Several protein bars, trail mix, and scented toiletries remained inside their tent, a decision that violated park regulations and would soon attract unwanted attention. Food-conditioned bears had been increasingly approaching the Banff area in recent months. Wildlife officials had documented multiple incidents of bears raiding improperly secured campsites, though no attacks had occurred. The area where Shauna chose to camp had seen 3 bear sightings in the previous week alone. Local rangers had even placed additional warning signs at trailheads, but the couple had arrived after dark and missed these crucial alerts. Grizzly bears in the Banff region typically weigh between 300 to 700 pounds, with males being larger than females. These powerful omnivores possess incredible strength and a sense of smell that can detect food from over a mile away. By late autumn, grizzlies enter hyperphagia, an intense feeding period where they consume thousands of calories daily to prepare for winter hibernation. Their normally cautious nature around humans can be overridden by hunger as winter approaches. At approximately 2:13 in the morning, as the couple slept soundly in their tent, a male grizzly that had previously been hazed by park officials detected the scent of food. The bear, identified later as Bear 164, had been pushed toward human settlements due to territorial disputes with other males and the lure of easy meals. Fresh paw prints discovered the next day showed it had circled the tent several times before making its move. The first indication of danger came as a low, huffing sound outside the tent. Shauna stirred from her sleep, nudging Alex awake. Before either could react, the fabric of their tent ripped open with a violent tearing sound as the grizzly's powerful claws shredded through the nylon material. In the darkness, illuminated only by the beam of a hastily grabbed flashlight, the massive silhouette of the bear loomed over them. The grizzly lunged forward, its jaws clamping down on Shauna's shoulder. Her collarbone shattered as the bear's teeth penetrated deep into muscle tissue. Alex scrambled backward toward the tent opening, screaming for help. The bear, focused entirely on Shauna, dragged her from the sleeping bag. Its claws raked across her torso, causing severe lacerations. Blood saturated the tent floor as Shauna fought desperately, striking at the bear's face. The grizzly responded by shaking her violently, causing catastrophic internal injuries. Within moments, Shauna lost consciousness from the massive blood loss and trauma. Alex managed to escape the tent and climb a nearby tree, where he watched in horror as the bear dragged Shauna's body several meters from the campsite. The grizzly continued to maul her before beginning to feed. Park rangers and emergency responders arrived at the remote location hours later, finding Alex still in the tree, suffering from hypothermia and shock. Shauna's body was recovered the following morning, after the bear had left the area. An investigation revealed that Bear 164 had been previously identified as a problem bear that had been hazed away from campgrounds on multiple occasions but never relocated. Following the attack, wildlife officials tracked the grizzly using DNA evidence from the scene and euthanized it 3 days later. The fatal encounter became the first documented grizzly-caused human death in Banff in over a decade, prompting wildlife officials to review their bear management protocols. Local guides reported a noticeable increase in visitors requesting bear safety information in the months following Shauna's death. It was August 7, 2015. While the pine-scented air hung still over Washington's Wenatchee National Forest, a group of high schoolers moved single file along a narrow ridge trail, their voices echoing softly through the towering evergreens. Most were participating in a weekend leadership retreat, but 17-year-old Owen Carver had his own agenda brewing beneath his confident exterior. Owen was the kind of teenager who commanded attention without asking for it. With his brown hair and cocky grin, he had cultivated an image as the group's resident survivalist. His social media account featured dozens of videos where he demonstrated danger drills and talks about dominance over wildlife. His followers, mostly classmates and friends, hung on every word as he explained how predators only go after prey that acts afraid. He thought confidence was a substitute for caution, proof his foolishness didn't understand what real danger looked like. That afternoon, while the group rested at a scenic clearing, Owen's restless energy got the better of him. His classmates mentioned he had been chafing under the adult leader's constant reminders to stay close, likely viewing their caution as weakness rather than wisdom. His phone battery was running low, but he said he wanted one more video, unaware that it would be his last one. As they wandered toward a rocky outcrop, movement caught his eye. Beneath a shaded ledge, partially concealed by shadows and scrub brush, a large cat stared back at him with unblinking golden eyes. The cougar was magnificent, easily 6 feet long from nose to tail, its tawny coat blending perfectly with the rocks. Two of Owen's friends, Jake and Madison, had followed him despite the leader's instructions to stay put. They stopped short when they spotted the predator, their faces draining of color. The cougar remained motionless, crouched low with its head slightly tilted, tail twitching. Jake muttered a curse and stepped back. Owen, grinning, told them to stay put. He was about to win a staring contest with a mountain lion. He believed holding eye contact showed dominance and refusing to back down was a sign of control. But anyone who actually understood wild animals would have called it a sign of stupidity. What Owen mistook for calmness in the cougar's posture was in reality the silent tension of a predator sizing up a potential threat. The twitching tail wasn't a casual flick, it was a clear warning, well documented in wildlife behavioral studies and often a precursor to attack. In most cases, cougars avoid human contact, but when they feel cornered or challenged, their response is immediate and brutal. Mountain lions, also known as cougars or pumas, are stealthy apex predators. Weighing up to 220 pounds, they can leap 15 feet vertically and 40 feet horizontally with 2-inch retractable claws and a 400 psi bite. Most critically, cougars are ambush predators, evolved to kill quickly and silently, typically targeting the neck and spine to ensure an instant kill. Owen began moving slowly toward the animal. He kept his gaze locked on the cougar's eyes. His arms relaxed at his sides in what he assumed was a stance of dominant calm. Each step brought him closer to a wild animal that had already made up its mind. When he came within 15 feet of the ledge, the cougar's body tensed like a coiled spring. According to Jake and Madison, the attack happened almost faster than the group could register. The big cat launched forward in a single violent leap. Owen managed to lift up his arms and let out a shout, but the cougar's paw struck him across the face with brutal force, sending him crashing backward onto the rocks. The animal landed squarely on top of him, jaws locking around his neck in a killing hold honed by millennia of evolution. The bite targeted the spine and major arteries, ensuring a swift death while minimizing the cougar's exposure to risk. Jake and Madison screamed, frozen by the sight of their friend being dragged toward the brush. They turned and ran down the trail, shouting for help as their cries echoed through the forest. It took nearly 30 minutes for rangers to reach the site, guided by the teens' panicked directions and screams. When they arrived, the cougar was still nearby, pacing in a tight circle near Owen's body with its ears flattened. Classic territorial behavior indicating it was prepared to defend what it considered its kill. He had already died from the initial attack. The rangers were forced to euthanize the animal on the spot, following standard protocol for a confirmed human fatality. A healthy adult male, the cougar had not been hunting Owen as prey, but had likely been startled by his confrontational approach. Owen's death sent ripples through outdoor education communities and led to renewed scrutiny of wilderness safety practices. Hours before the attack, his final Instagram post showed him smiling at the camera with a caption boasting about showing up the less experienced students and promising dramatic footage from the day's hike. His funeral was held the following week at a small church in Tacoma, where friends, classmates, and stunned trip leaders gathered to remember a teenager known for his energy, confidence, and unshakable belief that he could handle anything nature threw his way. September 15, 2021. The dense forests of Rutland County, Vermont were experiencing peak autumn transformation. The maple and birch trees displayed brilliant reds and golds, creating a picturesque backdrop that drew content creators seeking dramatic footage for their channels. Kyle Merritt, a 28-year-old YouTuber from Burlington, had built a modest following of 45,000 subscribers on his outdoor adventure channel, Vermont Wild. Known for his fearless approach to wildlife encounters, Kyle specialized in creating content that pushed the boundaries of outdoor exploration. His videos often featured close encounters with Vermont's native animals, earning him both praise and criticism from viewers concerned about his safety practices. Kyle had driven 3 hours south to explore remote trails near Mount Tabor, planning to film his latest episode titled Tracking Vermont's Black Bears. He carried professional camera equipment, including a GoPro chest mount and handheld stabilizer, along with his basic hiking supplies. Notably absent was bear spray, which Kyle had dismissed in previous videos as unnecessary for black bear encounters. His girlfriend knew his planned route and expected return time. The morning air was crisp at 42 degrees when Kyle began his solo hike, already recording his introduction segment. The forest was unusually quiet as Kyle narrated his journey for his audience. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, with Vermont hosting an estimated 6,000 individuals. Adult males typically weigh between 200 to 400 pounds and can run up to 30 miles per hour. During autumn, they enter hyperphagia, consuming up to 20,000 calories daily to build fat reserves for winter hibernation. Their bite force measures approximately 400 to 600 pounds per square inch. While generally avoiding human contact, bears become aggressive when surprised, cornered, or protecting food sources. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Kyle was filming bear tracking signs when he spotted fresh claw marks on a tree. Excited by the discovery, he moved closer with his camera, narrating his findings. A large male black bear, estimated at 340 pounds, had been foraging nearby and detected Kyle's presence. The bear emerged from the undergrowth just 15 feet away. Kyle's immediate reaction was to continue filming, his confidence bolstered by previous successful encounters with a mountain lion in New Hampshire and a pack of coyotes near Lake Champlain that had earned him over 200,000 views each. Those viral videos had taught him that staying calm and keeping the camera rolling during wildlife encounters was the key to both safety and subscriber growth. Kyle believed this bear encounter would create his most viral content yet, drawing on the same fearless approach that had made him Vermont's most daring outdoor YouTuber. The bear, agitated by Kyle's proximity and equipment sounds, perceived the continued camera approach as threatening. When Kyle stumbled backward over a fallen branch, the sudden movement triggered the bear's defensive instincts. The animal charged with explosive speed. The initial impact sent Kyle crashing to the forest floor as his camera flew away. The 340-pound bear landed on Kyle's chest, immediately fracturing multiple ribs. The animal's first swipe across Kyle's face and neck caused devastating lacerations, with claws over 2 inches long tearing through skin and muscle down to bone. Kyle's attempts to protect his head resulted in severe defensive wounds to both arms. The bear's powerful jaws clamped around his left shoulder, delivering a crushing bite force that shattered his collarbone and severed major blood vessels. The animal shook its head violently, causing massive tissue damage and arterial bleeding. As Kyle weakened from blood loss, the bear continued its assault on his torso. Multiple rib fractures punctured his left lung, causing internal bleeding and respiratory distress. The bear's claws raked across Kyle's abdomen, penetrating the abdominal wall and causing fatal internal injuries. Kyle lost consciousness from severe blood loss, traumatic brain injury, and respiratory failure. He died within minutes from multiple traumatic injuries. Kyle's body was discovered the following morning by Vermont State Police after his girlfriend reported him missing. His camera equipment was found scattered around the attack site, with his GoPro still recording when discovered. Vermont Fish and Wildlife officials closed the trail system and launched an investigation into the state's first fatal black bear attack in over 2 decades. The bear was tracked and euthanized 3 days later after being identified through DNA evidence. Kyle's final footage provided investigators with crucial evidence about the attack sequence. His YouTube channel was memorialized by his family, who used the platform to promote wildlife safety education. The incident sparked debate within the outdoor content creator community about the ethics of pursuing dangerous wildlife footage for social media engagement. Kyle's death served as a sobering reminder of the risks involved in extreme outdoor content creation. June 17, 2011. The outskirts of Johannesburg, South Africa were shrouded in darkness. The Soweto township, with its densely packed homes and narrow streets, was just beginning to stir. Drought had plagued the region for months, turning the once lush landscape into parched earth. Extensive deforestation near Krugersdorp had devastated natural habitats, pushing desperate wildlife closer to human settlements than ever before. Malcolm Tuwani, a 52-year-old taxi driver, was returning home after a grueling 12-hour night shift. A respected figure in his community, Malcolm had driven taxis for over 20 years, navigating the complex streets of Johannesburg with an expertise that earned him loyal customers. His eldest son had just started university, a source of immense pride for Malcolm, who had sacrificed much to provide educational opportunities for his children. That fateful morning, he parked his white Toyota sedan on the street as usual, just 50 meters from his modest brick home. The streetlights cast elongated shadows as he gathered his belongings and began the short walk to his gate. Unknown to Malcolm, the environmental pressures had pushed a leopard into the urban edges of Johannesburg. Leopards, highly adaptable and naturally nocturnal, had begun targeting stray dogs and goats in the township. Several residents had reported missing pets and unusual sounds in the night, but authorities had dismissed these as routine urban problems rather than signs of a dangerous predator. Leopards are Africa's most adaptable big cats, capable of surviving in diverse environments from mountains to urban fringes. Unlike lions, they hunt alone and rely on stealth rather than speed. A fully grown male leopard typically weighs between 60 and 70 kilograms and possesses jaw strength powerful enough to drag prey twice its own weight up into trees. Their roseate-spotted coats provide excellent camouflage, allowing them to disappear against dappled light and shadow, even in urban environments where walls and drainage ditches offer hiding places. As Malcolm approached his gate at approximately 4:30 in the morning, the leopard was crouched behind a low concrete wall adjacent to his property. When Malcolm passed within striking distance, the leopard launched itself at him. The attack was silent and lightning fast, giving Malcolm no chance to react or defend himself. The leopard's jaws clamped onto Malcolm's neck, its canines puncturing vital blood vessels. The bite delivered approximately 300 to 500 pounds of pressure per square inch, causing immediate and severe damage. Malcolm had no time to call for help as the leopard's weight drove him into the ground. His body slammed against the dirt road, the impact causing severe additional trauma. The leopard's front claws dug into Malcolm's shoulder for stability, penetrating through his jacket. Neighbors heard the commotion but mistook the sounds for a robbery, a common occurrence in the area. No one ventured outside to investigate. The leopard maintained its grip on Malcolm's neck, ensuring its prey was immobilized. Blood pooled beneath Malcolm's body as the predator began to drag him toward a nearby drainage ditch, following the instinctive behavior to secure its kill. The leopard's claws tore through Malcolm's clothing and lacerated his back as it dragged him approximately 15 meters across the rough terrain. By this point, Malcolm had lost consciousness from blood loss and trauma. His body was limp as the leopard attempted to pull him into the narrow concrete drainage channel. A passing delivery truck's headlights illuminated the scene, startling the leopard and causing it to retreat into the shadows. The driver spotted Malcolm's body and immediately alerted authorities. But by the time emergency services arrived, Malcolm had already died from blood loss and traumatic injuries. The official time of death was recorded as 4:47 in the morning. In the aftermath, wildlife authorities launched a search for the leopard, setting traps throughout the township. 3 days later, they captured a male leopard approximately 2 kilometers from the attack site. DNA testing confirmed it was responsible for Malcolm's death. The incident sparked concern in the community and raised questions about urban wildlife management during environmental crises. Malcolm's family received compensation from the local government, though they claimed that officials had ignored previous warnings about predator sightings in residential areas. It was March 17, 2018. And the Gulf Coast waters were calm as Craig Millen stepped ankle-deep into the surf before sunrise. The 52-year-old commercial fisherman from Galveston had been walking these beaches since childhood, his weathered hands and sun-damaged skin telling the story of decades spent battling wind, salt, and tide. But Craig's latest obsession would prove to be his undoing. Craig was known among his fishing circle for his eccentric habits and deep distrust of anything manufactured or store-bought. Craig's garage was packed with driftwood lures, rope-braided lines, and jars of his homemade sunscreen, a mix of cod liver oil, crushed anchovies, and street herbs. He slathered it on daily, ignoring friends' complaints that he smelled like a rotting bait bucket. Even among seasoned anglers, his methods pushed well beyond common sense. Craig's homemade sunscreen wasn't just ineffective, it was essentially a dinner bell for every predator within miles. The cod liver oil and crushed anchovies created a scent trail that would carry on the current like a highway leading directly to him. But Craig dismissed such concerns with the confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong by nature's harsh lessons. He insisted that sharks were drawn to motion, not scent, and often waved off the shark incident reports posted near the Galveston Pier. According to Craig, the idea that blood attracts sharks was just Hollywood nonsense. In his view, staying calm and avoiding splashing was all it took to stay safe. That March morning, Craig skipped his usual waders, saying they were too hot for the warm weather. Wearing only swim trunks and his worn fishing vest, he coated himself in his homemade sunscreen, the oily mix glistening as he waded into the murky water. It was the kind of setup that ignored every basic rule of safe shoreline fishing. His friend Danny, standing on the shore a few yards away, watched with mild amusement. A recent storm had left the Gulf murky with near zero visibility. What Craig didn't see and what biologists have been tracking was a group of 4 to 6 foot juvenile bull sharks prowling the shallows, drawn by the disoriented prey stirred up by the rough surf. Bull sharks are among the world's most dangerous, second only to great whites in human attacks. They can reach 11 feet, weigh over 500 pounds, and deliver a bite force of 1,300 psi. Able to thrive in both salt and fresh water, they often hunt in shallow areas where people swim, and their powerful sense of smell lets them detect blood at 1 part per billion. Texas Parks and Wildlife had issued advisories about increased shark activity, but Craig rarely paid attention to official warnings. He preferred to trust his own experience and instincts, which would be his undoing. As Craig waded waist-deep into the chocolate-colored surf, His scent trail spread like an invisible cloud through the water. The combination of fish oils and organic compounds created an olfactory beacon that registered immediately on the sensitive chemoreceptors of every predator in the area. To a bull shark, Craig didn't smell like a human. He smelled like prey in distress, wounded and vulnerable. Within minutes of casting his first line, it happened. Danny saw Craig jerk violently to one side, then scream, a sharp guttural sound that shattered the calm. A 5-foot bull shark had struck from below, ramming Craig's left thigh and clamping down with a suddenness that stunned even Danny, who stood frozen at the waterline. Craig thrashed and tried to retreat, but the shark held fast. Bull sharks don't nibble, they grip, twist, and tear. As it shook its body, flesh and blood fanned out in the waves. Craig screamed again, then fell forward, struggling to stay upright. Danny ran toward the water but stopped short, helpless. The water around Craig had turned red. In under 30 seconds, it was over. The shark let go and vanished. Craig collapsed sideways into the surf, his face twisted in agony, blood pouring from a gaping wound where the femoral artery had been torn open. What Danny had first mistaken for just another misstep in the water had unfolded into something far worse than he was prepared to witness. Two off-duty lifeguards, brothers who had been jogging along the shoreline, sprinted into the water without hesitation. They dragged Craig's limp form onto the sand, his left leg mangled and bleeding profusely. One brother applied pressure to the wound while the other called 911, but both could see that Craig was fading fast. Emergency crews arrived within 8 minutes, but Craig had already lost too much blood. Paramedics fought to stabilize him en route, but his pulse faded steadily. He was pronounced dead at the hospital, never regaining consciousness. The investigation made clear what had gone wrong. Craig's open tackle box was found in the surf, unused shrimp bait still inside, showing he hadn't been chumming or doing anything that typically attracts sharks. But the fish oil coating his body told a different story. Texas Parks and Wildlife issued a new advisory warning anglers not to use animal-based oils or fish-scented products while wading in coastal waters, especially during low-visibility conditions when sharks rely most on scent. For Craig's fishing circle, the message was painfully clear. At his memorial overlooking the same stretch of shoreline, his friend Danny summed it up. Craig always said instincts beat book smarts. Turns out, facts beat both. March 14, 2016 began as a mild spring day in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The morning frost had given way to sunshine. By late afternoon, the temperature had climbed into the low 60s, prompting many residents to open windows and spend time outdoors after the long winter months. Martin Delano was an 81-year-old retired high school history teacher who had lived in the same Cherry Hill home for over 4 decades. Martin lived alone except for his beloved golden retriever, Rusty. Despite his age, Martin maintained an active lifestyle. Neighbors often saw him chatting with fellow dog walkers or helping younger families with historical research for their children's school projects. His gentle demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge made him a beloved figure in the community. That particular day, Martin had spent the morning and early afternoon volunteering at the library. He returned home ready for his evening ritual with Rusty. As usual, he filled Rusty's bowl on the back porch while the dog waited patiently. What Martin didn't know was that a raccoon had been frequenting his neighborhood for several days, exhibiting behavior that concerned some residents. Normally nocturnal creatures, this particular raccoon had been spotted during daylight hours, appearing disoriented and unusually aggressive. Raccoons are common throughout North America and are highly adaptable to urban and suburban environments. These intelligent omnivores have dexterous front paws with 5 fingers each, allowing them to open garbage cans, unscrew jars, and manipulate complex objects. While generally not dangerous to humans, they can carry several diseases. most notably rabies. As Martin bent down to place Rusty's bowl on the porch, he saw a medium-sized raccoon approaching from the corner of the yard. The animal moved with an unsteady gait, its fur matted and disheveled. Martin straightened up slowly, not wanting to startle the creature, and placed a protective hand on Rusty's collar. The raccoon stopped momentarily, swaying slightly as it seemed to assess the situation. Then, without warning, it charged forward with surprising speed. Before Martin could react, the raccoon had lunged at him, latching onto his right hand with its teeth and claws. The initial bite was painful, causing Martin to cry out in surprise. Rusty barked frantically, but the elderly dog was too well trained to attack without command. Martin tried to shake the raccoon off, but it held firm, its teeth penetrating the skin between his thumb and forefinger. Raccoons have sharp, pointed teeth designed for their omnivorous diet, capable of tearing flesh and causing puncture wounds rather than the large lacerations that might come from larger predators. Martin shouted and swung his arm in an attempt to dislodge the animal. Animals infected with rabies often exhibit what's called furious rabies, characterized by increased aggression and a complete lack of fear, behaviors that would normally be suppressed in healthy wild animals. With his free hand, Martin managed to reach for a broom that was leaning against the porch railing. He swung it at the raccoon, striking it hard enough to finally break its grip on his arm. The animal fell to the porch floor but immediately turned to attack again, its eyes wild and mouth foaming slightly. Excessive salivation or foaming at the mouth is one of the classic symptoms of rabies, caused by the virus's effect on the salivary glands and the animal's inability to swallow normally. Martin used the broom to keep the raccoon at bay, jabbing at it repeatedly until it finally retreated, disappearing under a gap in the fence. Shaking and in shock, Martin stumbled into his kitchen, where he ran cold water over his bleeding wounds. Rusty whined anxiously at his feet, sensing his owner's distress. A neighbor who had heard the commotion came to check on Martin and was alarmed by the bite wounds. Despite Martin's protest that he was fine, she insisted on driving him to the emergency room. It was at this critical junction that Martin made a decision that would ultimately cost him his life. A deeply religious man with some unconventional beliefs about medicine, Martin refused the rabies treatment. Despite the doctor's warnings about the seriousness of rabies and the urgency of beginning treatment, Martin insisted that he would be fine with just antibiotics for the wound infection. The medical staff documented his refusal of treatment and provided him with information about rabies symptoms, urging him to return immediately if he experienced any unusual sensations, difficulty swallowing, confusion, or agitation. Martin nodded politely but remained firm in his decision. He went back home and everything was fine until about 3 weeks after the incident. Concerned neighbors who hadn't seen Martin walking Rusty for several days checked on him and found him confused and agitated. When he told them about his symptoms and admitted that water caused him painful throat spasms when he tried to drink, they immediately called an ambulance. By the time Martin arrived at the hospital, he was in the advanced stages of rabies. His confusion had progressed to delirium, with periods of extreme agitation alternating with paralysis. This phase, known as furious rabies, is characterized by hyperactivity, confusion, hallucinations, and aggressive behavior. Martin's condition deteriorated rapidly. 7 days after the onset of symptoms, Martin Delano died from rabies. Martin's dog Rusty was taken in by a former student of his who lived nearby. Because Rusty's rabies vaccinations were up to date, he did not develop the disease, though he was kept under observation for several months as a precaution. Domestic animals like dogs and cats serve as an important buffer between wildlife rabies and humans, which is why rabies vaccination is required by law in most jurisdictions. It was June 30th, 2018. Morning came when Rory Delgado stepped barefoot into the still water of Mosquito Lagoon. The sky was overcast and the light was flat, making it hard to see what was underneath the water's surface. To Rory, this was ideal. No tourists, no boats, just the sound of fish splashing as they scattered below. He didn't realize they weren't moving away because of him. Rory was a 39-year-old competitive angler from New Smyrna Beach, Florida, known throughout local fishing circles for his aggressive wading techniques and stubborn refusal to fish from boats. His philosophy was simple. Fishing was about being in it, not above it. While other anglers use shallow draft skiffs or kayaks to navigate the treacherous waters, Rory preferred to wade, often covering distances that made even experienced guides uncomfortable. His social media account is filled with photos of trophy redfish caught in impossibly shallow water, always with Rory standing waist deep in the lagoon. That morning, Rory had made a decision that would prove fatal. Despite slicing his big toe on a sharp oyster shell the previous day, he chose once again to fish barefoot. The wound became a dinner bell for any predator within miles. In this specific environment, even a few drops of blood can be detected by bull sharks from extraordinary distances. They're highly developed olfactory systems capable of sensing 1 part blood in 10 billion parts water. They're among the most dangerous sharks in the world, responsible for more unprovoked attacks on humans than any species except great whites and tiger sharks. Unlike their oceanic cousins, bull sharks possess a unique ability to regulate salt in their bodies, allowing them to venture far into freshwater systems and shallow estuaries. They can grow up to 11 feet long and weigh over 500 pounds, with a bite force exceeding 1,300 pounds per square inch. Most critically, bull sharks are opportunistic hunters with poor eyesight, relying on vibration, electrical impulses, and scent to locate prey in murky water. As Rory waded confidently toward a distant school of tailing redfish, he began working his favorite lures, loud surface poppers designed to mimic injured baitfish. The aggressive splashing and commotion were intended to provoke reaction strikes from redfish, but the disturbance attracted something far more dangerous. Bull sharks frequent these shallow estuaries during summer months, following massive schools of mullet and croaker that provide easy feeding opportunities. The combination of Rory's bleeding wound and the surface disturbance created the perfect storm of predatory triggers. A fellow angler positioned 300 yards away on the shoreline watched through binoculars as Rory worked methodically through the flat, his casts creating expanding rings on the still surface. The witness later told investigators that everything seemed normal until a sudden violent eruption of water appeared behind the unsuspecting fisherman. The bull shark, estimated at 6 feet in length and weighing approximately 200 pounds, had been stalking Rory for several minutes, drawn by the scent trail from his wounded toe and the vibrations from his surface lures. The attack came from behind and slightly to the side, a classic hunting pattern that prevents prey from detecting the approaching predator. The shark's initial strike was catastrophic. Its powerful jaws clamped down on Rory's lower left leg just above the ankle, the serrated teeth designed to grip and tear rather than slice cleanly. The bite severed Rory's posterior tibial artery, causing massive blood loss that would prove fatal within minutes. Rory's scream echoed across the lagoon, a sound nearby kayakers later described as unlike anything they'd ever heard. He tried to turn and fight, but the shark's grip and his injuries caused him to collapse in the shallow water. One kayaker paddled toward the scene after hearing the scream while signaling other people on the shore to call for help. By the time he arrived, Rory was face down and unresponsive, his fishing rod floating nearby with the lure still attached. Paramedics reached him minutes later, but it was too late. Rory had died from blood loss and shock. The autopsy confirmed the catastrophic bite to his lower left leg showed deep tearing and crushed bone consistent with a bull shark strike. There were no defensive injuries, indicating he likely lost consciousness within seconds. Rory was laid to rest in a small private ceremony in Titusville. The turnout was quiet but heartfelt. mostly locals who knew the risks but respected the man who had taken them. Many fellow anglers admitted they had long worried about his habit of wading alone in dangerous waters, often ignoring basic safety protocols that could have prevented the tragedy. Warning signs were temporarily posted along the Mosquito Lagoon shoreline. They issued a public advisory urging anglers to avoid wading alone, especially with open wounds or during peak feeding times. The incident was officially classified as a provoked attack due to the presence of active surface lures and bleeding in known shark territory. Thanks for watching. Don't stop here. Click the video on your screen now for more.